monstrous Hurricane Ike slams water into Crystal Beach, Texas.
If it rises 20 more feet, we're just walking dead people.
Follow the path of destruction from inside the storm, block by block and minute by minute. From a couple trapped in their attic.
She said, "What are we going to do now?" And I said, "Well, we're probably going to die."
To a seaside cabin where a Vietnam veteran is in for the fight of his life.
It's just a survival mode. You don't think about it.
To a storm-battered resort where two Texans make their last stand.
Devastation, incredible devastation. That all flashes back in my mind whenever I hear the name Hurricane Ike.
Experience the most dangerous hurricanes on the planet as if you were there, caught in the eye of the storm. This is Hurricane 360. Friday, September 12th, 2008. The outer bands of a massive hurricane appear in the skies over the seaside community of Crystal Beach, Texas.
The sun was out, but you could tell something was coming. There was just this eerie feeling in the air that you could tell something was coming. You could feel it. We walked down there, looked at debris. I found a doll, found some clothes, found some signs, found some bananas that were coming up from Cuba, which was 2 days away. So it was big.
2 weeks earlier, August 2008, a strong tropical disturbance moves off the Atlantic coast of West Africa and develops into a tropical depression, the first step to becoming a powerful hurricane.
It's going to be moving basically west, and it'll be near or just north of the Antilles and the northern Leeward Islands in about 5 days.
Within days, the storm reaches its full deadly potential. A swirling killer of rain, sea, and winds approaching 150 miles per hour.
We cannot rule out the chance that this could hit South Florida, including Miami, the Keys, or emerge out into the Gulf of Mexico, and it could do that still as a major hurricane.
As it passes over the mountains of Cuba, Ike's winds are disrupted and spread out. This allows Ike to grow into a massive circulation that would cover the entire Gulf of Mexico, larger than Hurricane Katrina 3 years earlier.
That northern edge is basically being choked a little bit, so the outflow is all to the south and southwest. We think that's going to change over the next couple days, and the system is going to strengthen.
The storm is now on a collision course with the southern United States and the exposed beach communities of the Bolivar Peninsula in Texas. Just a few miles northeast of Galveston, the Bolivar Peninsula is a narrow stretch of land directly facing the Gulf of Mexico that includes the town of Crystal Beach. September 11th, 2008. Frank Sherman and his wife Deanne are busy helping their friends and neighbors evacuate. Frank, or simply Sherman to his friends, owns a successful garage and used car dealership in Crystal Beach.
We had been warned by the Weather Service basically what was going to happen, but I stayed a little bit too late. We had a lot of elderly people around, and people needed batteries. We gave them batteries. We fixed cars. We pulled people's cars out of their garages that had been sitting there forever, got them, mounted tires, got people on the road, got everybody ready to go that we could.
The town of Crystal Beach is home to a few thousand retirees, fishermen, and cowboys. A lone stretch of asphalt, Highway 87, runs the length of the peninsula, separating beach cottages from cattle ranches and shrimp boats.
They used to call it a small drinking town with a fishing problem. It was just a laid-back area. With the wrecker service, I had 32 miles of sand to pull people out of during the summertime.
But on September 11th, the laid-back community is in full crisis mode. With disasters like Katrina and Rita still in recent memory, thousands of Texans head for higher ground. And the clock is ticking. Ike is barely a day away, and with an intercoastal ferry already shut down, the only other escape from Crystal Beach is a bridge known as the Rollover Pass. As soon as they finish helping their neighbors, the Shermans plan to evacuate to the mainland, and they're not alone. Carol Hamaday, a former nurse who owns a bed and breakfast only yards from the ocean, also plans to head for higher ground.
I was going to leave on Wednesday afternoon or Thursday morning, but what happened to change those plans was Tuesday my good friend Diana called me and needed me to pick her up. And I told her I'd take her with me to evacuate.
But when Carol arrives at Diane's house, Diane tells her that an elderly woman is stranded in a nearby home and needs to be rescued.
And I thought an old ladies are very sweet, be no problem, of course. So we stopped by to pick her up, and I brought my friend Diane and the older lady back to the B&B.
But only hours after Carol and Diane get the older woman back to the bed and breakfast, Carol's unexpected guest barricades herself in one of the bedrooms.
That was Thursday evening when we should have been getting out of here when all the roads were passable.
2 miles away. While most people on the peninsula plan to head north into the Texas heartland, Connie Travis and her husband Doug and son Matthew decide to stay behind and ride it out. Having grown up in Arizona, Connie has never witnessed a major hurricane.
I was very curious. I was 100% curious. I wanted to do it. I wanted to stay because I thought it's a level 1 or 2. It's not going to be that bad, but it's going to be interesting for people to see.
But as Connie surveys the debris that washes ashore, she begins to reconsider their staying behind in Crystal Beach.
I think there was a moment after I saw that, we thought about maybe leaving. We decided to drive down to Rollover Pass because I said, you know what, Doug, maybe if we can get out, maybe we ought to go. But Rollover Pass had already washed away.
The Rollover Pass, a critical link to the outside world, has been plastered by waves that have literally ripped the concrete bridge span to pieces. With the ferry already shut down, Hurricane Ike has knocked out the only other escape from the Boulevard Peninsula. Anyone trapped west of the bridge is now directly in the storm's crosshairs, and that includes Frank and Deanne Sherman.
We called ahead to our safe house up in High Island, and they told us, sorry, y'all, forget it. The bridge is already washed out. We're down here throwing life preservers to people. And at that point, we knew we were going to be stranded here.
Once that pass is gone, you can't get out of here. Unless you got a boat, and you wouldn't got out of here anyway because the water was too high. The ferry stopped the night before, so we were just surrounded by water.
The waves were already over the bridge, so there was no way out. In fact, a lot of the people that died were the people that tried to make that run, and then the waves washed them away. We could see we got within 10 feet, and there was no way we could cross over Rollover Pass.
Also stranded on Highway 87 is Carol Hamaday, along with her friend Diane and the elderly woman who they finally convinced to leave her room at the bed and breakfast.
They said, go back, there's no way out. Well, we sat in the vehicle for a while, and I called 911.
The operator tells Carol that if she and her friends move quickly, they might make it to Fort Travis, a former U.S. Army garrison, in time for a final helicopter evacuation. The fort is less than 20 miles away.
She said, get down to the fort. There'll be helicopters taking people out. And so I said, well, we have our 2 little lap dogs. Is that okay? And she said, no. Take your dogs home and leave them. And just get down to the fort. I said, we can't leave our little lap dog, a 10-pound dog, to die. And she said, get down to the fort by yourself.
By now, water has surged over the coastal sand dunes and is beginning to flood the Boulevard Peninsula.
As you can see, the waves continuing to crash over the seawall. Look at that. And then right over the street there. And as a matter of fact, the streets are basically closed off. They are very dangerous, and they're only going to get worse.
If Carol and her friends have any chance of driving the ocean-swamped highway to Fort Travis, they have to leave immediately. The window of escape is rapidly closing.
Then I called back one final time, and I got this same woman that I'd gotten initially. And she said, I already told you to take those dogs back and leave them and get down to the fort. She said, if you don't do that now, you might as well write your Social Security number on your arm and go home and die.
September 12, 2008. Hurricane Ike has already devastated the island nations of Haiti and Cuba. Now, it sets its sights on the seaside communities on the Texas Gulf Coast. Ike delivers a barrage of Category 2 winds, along with intense flooding. Ike's storm surge could be greater than 18 feet deep with flooding as far as 10 miles inland. The pre-surge flooding is rapidly closing off any possible escape from the peninsula. Unwilling to abandon her pets, Carol Hemaday decides to return to her bed and breakfast to ride out the storm. 2 miles away, also trapped in Crystal Beach, Connie Travis and her family watch as Ike makes landfall.
It was eerie. It was just eerie to see everything starting to float around. You'd see these cars, just things starting to float around all over the place.
It's now 5 p.m. Rain begins to hammer the Boulevard Peninsula. As the storm's outer bands lash the coast, winds are starting to rise, already reaching 110 miles per hour over the Gulf of Mexico. Frank and Deanne Sherman used the final hours of daylight to fortify their house.
And at that point, we knew we were going to be stranded here. I got a couple generators, fuel for them, all the 5-gallon jugs of water I had at the shop. Set everything up at the house, lugged all this stuff upstairs.
Like most area homes, the Shermans has been built with hurricanes in mind and stands 16 feet above the ground on solid pilings. But as they watch the water rise all around them, they begin to realize that this storm is unlike anything they've faced before.
The water came from nothing up to about 18, 20 feet in a matter of a couple hours. It was pretty quick. It was pretty sudden. At that point, we knew we were in real trouble.
Like Frank and Deanne Sherman, carpenter Bobby Anderson could have escaped long before Ike came ashore, but chose to stay behind to help his friends and neighbors.
I waited too long and basically could not get out. Tried to leave and got within about 3 miles of Rollover Pass, and the water was, so high over the highway that it was not passable, and had to turn around and go back to Crystal Beach.
With nowhere to run, Bobby meets up with other holdouts at one of Crystal Beach's local bars.
And we were watching the television, and they were making a broadcast that anyone that's trapped on the peninsula, dial 311, and we'll see about, coming and getting you.
Bobby is told that it might not be too late to call in a rescue.
And they said, okay, we'll send a helicopter to the Rancho Caribe golf course to pick you up.
Even as seawater begins to drown most of the Boulevard Peninsula, Bobby and his friend Sandy make their way to the golf course, believing that helicopters are only minutes away. The golf course and its pro shop are at a higher elevation than the rest of Crystal Beach. A simple matter of geography could prove to be the difference between life and death.
After about an hour and a half, we got to wondering. We called again. They said, where you at? And they said, we're at the Rancho Caribe golf course. They said, just stay there. We got a helicopter coming to get you. And we called about every hour or so. And then finally, in the afternoon, they said, well, we're sorry, but the wind is too high. We can't come get you.
Parts of Crystal Beach are already underwater. And still, the main part of the storm is hours away. Hurricane Ike hasn't even made landfall.
I just knew there's no way we're going to live through this. What's it going to be like when it makes landfall 2 in the morning? 8 hours later, how high can it get? If it's 14, 15 feet high now, what's it going to do?
10 p.m. Jason Cook, a former U.S. Marine, is unprepared for the storm's fury.
You could hear the waves. It was kind of a roar, and you could feel the waves hitting your house. So everything was washing around, banging into the house.
Then, with flooding already rising to 20 feet, a massive wave rips into Jason Cook's house. The surge tears across the peninsula.
Had enough force that it took the walls out of the house and pushed my wife and I up against the other wall on the other side of the house.
The water was rising. We had enough time to get my guitar, of course, Sherman's guns, of course. That was all
we really had time for.
As the walls begin to collapse all around him, Jason searches for a possible escape.
I think it's just a survival mode. You don't think about it. You just do it automatically.
Jason, who once survived firefights in the jungles of Vietnam, is now in for the fight of his life. September 12th, 2008, 10 p.m. Striking in the middle of the night, Hurricane Ike wreaks havoc along the Gulf Coast of Texas. The Boulevard Peninsula community of Crystal Beach is caught in the crosshairs of Ike's rage. Waves and wind, reaching well over 110 miles per hour, tear through the seaside village and bury it beneath a torrent of mud and debris. As his house begins to collapse around him, Jason Cook relies on the survival instincts he gained in the jungles of Vietnam.
We had a saying, fight or die. So you fight.
The storm has punched a hole in Jason's roof.
And I said, that's the only way I can get out. So I climbed up through the hole, grabbed a hold of the chimney stack, and then everything was gone.
Cook's house collapses beneath him, just as the Gulf of Mexico rises up and swamps the Boulevard Peninsula. He's now adrift on his roof in the raging floodwaters. The same surge that wipes out Jason Cook's cottage swamps the Gulf Resort, where Bobby Anderson and his friend Sandy have been stranded for hours.
The thing about being scared, it's like a combination of emotions. You're scared, you know that you've got to keep your head and do something, and you have to react all at once.
The resort is 14 feet above sea level. Bobby and Sandy thought they would be safe here, but the waters continue to rise. The beams and rafters above their heads are Bobby and Sandy's only hope for survival. To get to them, they will have to scale a concrete post. Already knee-deep in water, Bobby tries to hoist Sandy up.
And then that's when the tsunami waves started coming through. And it's about like a wave down on the beach where a big wave knocks you down and rolls you over for about 30 or 40 feet.
Bobby searches the darkness for Sandy, but she's nowhere in sight. With water rapidly filling the pro shop, he's forced to abandon the search and focus on his own survival.
The grout lines of the stone were pretty bold, and I was able to get a finger hold in them and climb on the corner. And when I got up and grabbed the framing of the ceiling and pulled myself up in there. And the water got within about 2 feet of where I was.
Just miles away, trapped inside her bed and breakfast with her friend Diane and a hotel guest who refused to evacuate, Carol Hemiday struggles to keep the water from flooding her home and business.
We were starting to get really high winds, and it was starting to actually separate the window from the frame. And so I called to the older lady out here, and I said, please, get me a couple of the strongest wire hangers you can.
Using little more than heavy-duty wire hangers and electrical cable to hold down the shutters, Carol and Diane hold on for dear life.
Diane and I each stood on one side of the window. When the wave was coming, we put all our weight on the top of the window with the bottoms being held in. The pressure of that water would take water and bring it, and it would hit the ceiling. It's unbelievable. Hit the ceiling with such force. Diane and I would say to each other, here comes another one. And Diane and I would hold on to something in the room and turn to the side of the wall so we wouldn't get sucked out. And we prayed.
September 13th, 2008, 2:15 a.m. Hurricane Ike has leveled whole regions of coastal Texas. Tidal waves have left 6 feet of water in the Galveston County Courthouse. The Galveston area is no stranger to hurricanes. In 1900, the island city and most of the surrounding region was wiped out by a legendary hurricane called Isaac's Storm that claimed nearly 12,000 lives. The exposed region was hit again in 1915 by a storm that killed 400 Texans and caused $50 million in damage. And nearly 100 years later, it's happening again to Galveston and the nearby communities on the Boulevard Peninsula. For a few hundred residents, the peninsula has become a death trap.
I would say 90% or 95% of the people got out before the storm hit. And we would have been one of them if we'd got out an hour earlier. I would not have stayed intentionally.
The storm has already killed more than 70 people in Haiti and caused $7.3 billion worth of damage in Cuba before slamming into the coast of Texas with 20-foot tidal surges. Trapped in a seaside bed and breakfast, Carol Hamaday and her friend Diane struggle to hold back the wind and water.
We ended up holding those windows until 2 in the morning. A solid 3 to 4 hours standing there and holding the windows in.
2 miles away, Frank and Deanne Sherman have taken cover in their attic and watch as the community they've called home for more than 25 years washes away before their very eyes.
That much water moving can move anything. Literally pick up vehicles and wash them out to sea, pick up houses, wash them out to sea, sort of like the tsunami they had in Japan. The wind was so loud you couldn't hear yourself talk. We had to holler in each other's ears.
We were right on the bay, where all the shrimp boats, all the oyster boats, all the boats, that's where they come in. So we had boats from everywhere knocking up against the house, and it was just like we were rocking.
The sand dunes that normally protect Crystal Beach from the sea have completely washed away. There's nothing left to stop the Gulf from covering the peninsula. Suddenly, something slams into the Sherman's house. The intense flooding has sent a massive vessel slicing through the Sherman's backyard.
I'd say a good 60-foot offshore shrimp boat. It came through the yard, and it was big enough and moving fast enough on the water that it knocked pilings out from under the house, 12 by 12 piling. She said, "What are we going to do now?" And I said, "Well, we're probably going to die."
And I said, "What, He said, "It's been a good 25 years. I've loved you." And I told him I loved him.
3:10 a.m., just hours after Ike drowns Galveston Bay and the Boulevard Peninsula, the eye of the storm suddenly appears overhead. The eye is a circular hole in the middle of a hurricane. It's an area of warmer temperatures that's so clear, stars can sometimes be seen in the sky overhead. It is surrounded by a wall of rain that stores the highest surface winds of the cyclone. Most eyes are at least 20 miles in diameter. Ike's is more than 2 times that size. Frank and Deanne Sherman crouch helplessly in their attic.
And then the eye hit, and we had like 10 minutes of total silence. My wife said, "It's over." I get a little choked up about it. So I told her, "No, that's half of it. We still have the second half of the storm to go."
Less than a mile away, Connie Travis and her family have all managed to ride out Ike's initial landfall. Somehow, by sheer luck, the waves that took out the Sherman's home have spared Connie's house. Connie's more worried that her relatives on the mainland might see news reports that claim anyone left on the Boulevard Peninsula is dead.
So I finally got a 911 call off. And I said, we're fine. It's just that the news keeps reporting that everybody's dead, and we're not dead. You need to get in touch with the news station and tell them that we're not dead. And she goes, oh, honey, you will be. On the backside of the hurricane is going to rise 20 feet. I told my husband, I said, we're walking dead people. If it rises 20 more feet, we're just walking dead people. It's just a matter of time whenever that 20 feet is going to happen.
The volunteer 911 operator then gives Connie some grave advice.
She said, do your family a favor. Get a Sharpie and write your name and your Social Security number on your arm so they can identify you.
Within minutes, the backlash, or dirty side of Hurricane Ike, begins to tear into the Boulevard Peninsula. This is the part of the hurricane that's spinning back towards the ocean, pushing debris that was blown inland by Ike's initial landfall back out to sea by the storm's swirling mass. Cars, pieces of houses, and boats.
And that backlash was bad. It was bad, because we had a lot more boats that were hitting in and knocking into the house. And we was listening to all these different noises. It was just totally unreal. And watching the ocean wash through the house, right through the whole living room area, through the bedroom, washed the bedroom wall out, just took everything out. And we just watched it. That's all we could do, and hold on and pray.
Several miles to the north. For the past few hours, Jason Cook has clung to a makeshift raft that was once his roof. Now, as Ike begins to spin towards the Texas heartland, Cook washes up on a debris-cluttered beach.
And it was so dark I couldn't see a thing. And I had to crawl across some debris, quite a bit of debris that was there.
Somehow, Cook has ridden his roof nearly a dozen miles to Galveston's East Bay. Incredibly, he finds a familiar item in the debris that will be the only thing he ever salvages from his home.
It was my stepdad's police jacket. And I laid down, pulled that jacket around me, and went to sleep.
September 13th, 2008, 6 a.m. After more than 12 hours of howling winds and intense tidal surges, Hurricane Ike moves north, away from Crystal Beach, on its course for the American Midwest.
I thought daylight was never going to come. That was probably the longest night of my entire life. It seemed like it lasted a week. I mean, it was a very long night, because all you could do is sit and look out this much space at black and hear the howl.
As daylight breaks, the rescue effort begins.
It was just a survival thing. I've got to have food, I've got to have water, I've got to get out of here.
For those trapped in Crystal Beach, the storm has passed. But the fight to survive is just getting started. Saturday, September 13th, 2008. In a little less than 24 hours, Hurricane Ike has devastated the Gulf Coast of Texas and Louisiana, leaving some 4.5 million residents without power. Ike's overall impact zone stretches hundreds of miles and has left parts of the Lone Star State submerged underwater, nearly a dozen miles from the coastline. On the Boulevard Peninsula, whole portions of Crystal Beach have been wiped out. In the ruins of a resort, Bobby Anderson has spent 8 harrowing hours holding on to the rafters of a golf shop. His friend Sandy is nowhere in sight.
I was just waiting for daylight so I could see to climb down. So it was probably about 8 o'clock the next morning whenever I climbed out.
As soon as he emerges from the wreckage, Bobby begins a frantic search for his missing friend Sandy.
It was so surreal and macabre You would see a house that maybe I had worked on years before sitting in the middle of Highway 87. And power lines and utility poles are laying everywhere. You see people's belongings, family photographs and things just laying strewn all over the road or bushes or whatever.
But he is unable to find any sign of Sandy.
Devastation, incredible devastation. That all flashes back in my mind whenever I hear the name Hurricane Ike.
4 miles away, having spent the entire night holding her storm windows in place against wind and seawater, Carol Hamaday and her friends are finally able to breathe a sigh of relief.
Very emotional moment. Very. Could have believed that we were still alive. We couldn't believe it. We should have been sucked out that window like everybody else got sucked out.
2 miles to the west, Frank Sherman and his wife Deanne find themselves surrounded by a wasteland of water, debris, and dead livestock.
When we first came down from that storm, it was a dead silence. It was like everybody in the whole world was just gone. We were on a no man's island, and there was nobody there with us, and there was no sound. And wondering, you know, if you're going to survive, if somebody's going to come get you.
Miles inland, Jason Cook slowly makes his way across the Texas bayou.
There was swamp on one side, the water on the other, so I got into the water, and after seeing 3 or 4 gators and water moccasins, I said, I don't need to be down here. And the mud was very thick. I was having a hard time getting my legs out of it and walking. And I could see helicopters going by. And they didn't see me, and I'm waving at them. And then I put the life preserver on, and then I'm out there waving. And I saw 2 guys in an Air Force helicopter. They were looking out, and they saw me because I had that life preserver on. I was waving my arms.
Hours after his house was torn apart by one of Ike's waves, former Marine Jason Cook is pulled out of the Texas swamps by an Air Force rescuer.
He said, now don't worry, you're safe. I said, son, I've done this more than once.
Others are not so lucky.
The helicopter came down and hovered right in front of the doorway where they could see us, and I could wave to the pilot, and he saw us. But there was no way they could get to us because eaves of the house hung over and the porch is going all the way around the house. So they finally went away. Finally realized that nobody's coming to get us. We're here. You can't count on anyone else. You're pretty much on your own.
But the storm victims aren't the only ones moving through the wasteland of Crystal Beach. Looters now search the rubble for valuables. The storm might be over, but the struggle to survive is just beginning. To follow all of your favorite shows on the Weather Channel, go to facebook.com/Weather Channel Originals. September 13th, 2008, 1 p.m. Hours after Hurricane Ike passed through Galveston Bay and the Boulevard Peninsula, most of the Texas coast is still submerged. From the city of Galveston to Lake Charles, Louisiana, whole towns are still 4 to 12 feet underwater. Septic tanks have also overflowed, making floodwaters toxic.
You simply can't imagine the devastation. It was like a war zone. It was like they had come in and just bombed the entire place. There were huge holes in the ground where people's houses used to be. There were buildings that looked like someone had bombed them. They just exploded and spread out over a huge area.
Throughout the peninsula, as temperatures rise, Sherman and dozens of other survivors venture out.
It was just a survival thing. I've got to get out of here.
At that point, it was just a matter of survival. Do what you can to stay alive. You have to have water, you have to have food.
Crossing through the post-storm wasteland, Frank Sherman searches for supplies and miraculously discovers 10 gallon-sized jugs of drinking water.
I took T-shirts, tied them together, and tied these water bottles to it and drug them back to the house. Came across 2 looters that had a pillowcase about half full of people's silverware and stuff that they had stolen out of houses.
Sherman calls out a warning, but the men don't back down.
I don't go anywhere unarmed. I popped a cap in there and ran them off, made them leave their stuff.
For the rest of the day, Sherman continues to clear debris and search for supplies amidst the wreckage of Crystal Beach.
If I ever had to get caught without anything, I'd want that man beside me, because he would be the one that would take care of me, and I know it.
Less than a mile away, Connie Travis and her husband and son have ridden out the entire storm in their family home. A difference of just a few feet in elevation above sea level and sheer luck are all that have kept them out of the floodwaters. Later that day, the Coast Guard arrives to evacuate Connie and her family.
He said, "You got to come up." And I said, "We don't want to go. We're fine." He goes, "I'm under strict orders to bring you up." And he said, "Are you Connie Travis?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You've got to come with me."
2 miles away, Carol Hamaday and the other women who rode out the storm at the bed and breakfast are forced to remain behind for 4 harrowing days without electricity or water before rescuers are finally able to fly them to higher ground.
So they took her out, and then Diane and I walked. I grabbed everything I could, and they took us to Galveston.
Help also arrives for Frank and Deanne Sherman.
The helicopter came by fairly low, and I got a T-shirt, and I flacked it and waved it until they finally stopped.
I've never seen him hug a man before, but he hugged that man, and he cried, and it was just like, it was a miracle. It was a miracle, because we had pretty much give up on the fact that anybody was going to come.
They couldn't take him on with them. They were just medical unit. They flagged us on GPS. About 8 hours, I believe, after that, Fish and Game showed up in an airboat to take us off.
A photographer from the Beaumont Enterprise captures the moment when Frank and Deanne finally reach dry land.
And the only thing I remember saying is, "Please, somebody let me use the phone so I can call my kids and let them know that we're still alive, that we're okay." And somebody did hand me a phone, and I called and let my son and daughter know that we were okay.
Ultimately, Hurricane Ike claims 112 American lives as it runs its course through Texas and the Midwest. The storm passes over the eastern provinces of Canada and even sends 30-foot waves crashing into the coast of Iceland. It remains the 3rd costliest hurricane to ever strike the United States and the most expensive to ever impact Texas. At least 74 people are killed in the state, many of whom were trapped in the Galveston area when Ike made landfall.
At the little Methodist church across the street, they found 3 people dead and it drowned because it was lower, and they were trapped when the water came in. They just simply couldn't get out.
Among the dead is Bobby Anderson's friend Sandy, who was swept out of his arms by the force of Ike's tidal surge. Like many survivors, Hurricane Ike is a memory that Bobby will live with for the rest of his life.
You realize just how quick things can turn for the worst. You thought you had everything figured out, and next thing you know, well, you just weren't quite as sharp as you thought you were.
Even now, the devastation left by Hurricane Ike is still visible. But for many of the Texans who live and work in Crystal Beach, the seaside community is still home.
We were a little band of beach community that came together, and Crystal Beach banded together. We shared something that will always be a part of us, will always be part of me.
Today, all that remains of Frank Sherman's successful business is an empty lot.
Everything else washed away and just disappeared.
The Shermans now live in Granbury, Texas, hundreds of miles from the Gulf of Mexico.
The whole time we were in the attic, my wife prayed for our lives, and it worked. And, you know, we're alive. We're still here.